Wonder. There's loads of more events to come up. We're going to invite our speaker, Joe, to the stage.
Yes. Hello, Joe.
Hi, everyone.
So, Joe, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, my name is Joe. I live and work in London, and my job is going around Christian unions like this one, helping students like you guys explore life's biggest questions and explore the claims of Jesus and Christianity. So I do loads of events like this, go around loads of places. It's a lot of fun.
I think we'll leave you to do the talk now, so
Great.
we'll come back.
And let me just say, if, as we're going through, you've got questions about things I'm saying, you can send those in this website above me here. They'll come up on the screen and we'll address some of those at the end. So feel free to have your phone out and send things in as we go through. Okay, so the question we're going to be thinking about, so over the next 20 minutes or so is, does faith have a place in an age of science? I'll talk for a bit, we'll have a pause, we'll do some Q&A. Hopefully we'll have a good time. I want to start with a true story from my life. The other night I was woken up by my wife, suddenly sitting up, literally bolt upright, next to me in bed. And she sat up and she's just staring down at her pillow, like dead still. I was confused, obviously, and in my kind of sleepy, semi, not really rational state, I was like, is everything okay? You all right? I promise you, the answer she gave me was this: Joe, there's a lobster on my pillow. To which I was like, Kat, don't be ridiculous. Lobsters live in the sea. There literally can't be a lobster on your pillow. She thought for a second, still didn't move, and she said, oh yeah, well then it's a crab. Ridiculous. Dreaming is a bizarre thing, isn't it? For hours each night, our minds create stories out of people from the previous day and things we have to do tomorrow and maybe just the events of the episode we've been watching on Netflix in the minutes before going to bed. And you get those especially odd moments, like my wife, when you're kind of in between sleeping and waking and the two worlds collide and smush together. There you are, underwater, face to face with a lobster, and then what's that? The ringing of your alarm clock bursts in, and you realize in that moment, this isn't true, this isn't reality, I'm dreaming. I wonder if we might think along the lines of that metaphor when we consider the progression of humanity over the last few centuries, that we've moved from a dreamland of fantasy stories into a reality of empirical certainty. Once upon a time when humans were more primitive and our knowledge of the world was far more basic, our ancestors would answer questions of their origin and why the harvest failed and why they lost in war to the neighboring tribe by making up stories of gods and heavens. And they attributed natural phenomena to magic, and they barely dared to even question the authority of whichever god they thought created the world. They lived by stories, by fantasies. And to them it seemed obvious, it seemed real and true. But now we've woken up. We've moved on from that dreamland of fantasy stories. Now we live not in some kind of fantasy world of our own invention, but in reality. We live in certainty and in truth. We live by science. Perhaps we even look with pity on those who still believe in gods. They've had their day. They need to move on. They need to wake up. As philosophy pushed the West into enlightenment a few centuries ago, like a big beeping alarm clock, waking us up to reality, the rate of human progression has hugely accelerated. We've seen the scientific method take off, making hypotheses that we can then test and analyze and confirm. And we can let go of speculation, can't we? We can live by what we know for certain instead. Test everything, prove everything. And fueled by that philosophy, we've achieved incredible amounts. We've dissected and discovered and developed our world, and we've obtained vast quantities of knowledge about how it all works. And it's brilliant, right? We've harnessed electricity and invented machines that can do just about any task we need. We've sent humans to the moon. We've revolutionized medicine, both through biology and anatomy and through pharmacology. We've increased life expectancy. We've made travel possible on a global scale. We've traced backwards towards the origins of the universe to understand more about how it all came to be. And we've understood the impact that humanity is having on our planet and the need to live sustainably on it. From the tiniest forces inside the center of atoms to the most distant blazing giants in the next galaxy, science has unlocked our world. And this empiricism has driven us to every corner of it. Science is brilliant, isn't it? It has brought us so far. And so faith, religion, those stories of our ancestors, they seem now little more than a leftover anachronism, something that belongs to another age. We've awoken from that dream. Now we live in the age of science. And what challenges and refutes science? Not my feelings, not my stories, not my faith. Better science. We determine the truth by careful science. So what place then does faith have in today's world? Can we hold it as anything other than a misguided fairy tale that people are too attached to ever give up? Increasingly, perhaps it's just a frustration. We're looking across the room to those who still cling to their outdated beliefs and just wishing they would come to their senses. Maybe we should feel a bit sorry for them, that due to the way they were brought up or how gullible they are, they're unable to be at all rational. As science continues to drive the progress of humanity, many of us have adopted a purely materialistic worldview. By that, just to clarify, I mean a worldview that's based on there being nothing more to this world than matter and energy. And most of us would see this as a change for the better. It's not just that science has taken away the need for a God to explain our world. We've also lost our desire for a God. Surely society is better now it's been freed from obedience to outdated religion and superstition. Surely we're better off now that we're in charge of our world. Surely I'm better off now that I can make rational choices based on hard facts rather than from fear and fiction. What place does faith have now? Why would we want to go back to living in dreamland now that we've woken up? Faith is dead. We have science instead now. Hopefully from everything I've said, you can see that I am very much in favour of science. To avoid doubt, let me assure you explicitly that I have no plans to stand here and tell you to drop your pencils or your pipettes or your Petri dishes, whatever kind of science you're involved in. In fact, I hope that what I am about to say might actually point to an even higher view of science, one that augments it rather than diminishing it. I love science, and I'm hardly a scientist myself, but I find it fascinating, and I can see, as well as the next person, that embracing proper science has done our world the world of good. But at the same time, I remain convinced that faith still has something to offer. That probably doesn't surprise you, given that you're sat in a Christian Union tent listening to a speaker who has faith of his own. But what is it? What can I honestly say faith has to offer us in today's world? In a world ruled by science, I think faith offers us a story. And I know that up to this point, I've been writing faith off as made-up fairy tales, but this is different. And if you hang in there, I'm going to try and show you why. Let's just imagine for a second that one morning, as I'm leaving my flat, I find waiting for me on my doorstep a flower. Unusual, at least for me. Now, I could use various scientific methods to find out an awful lot of information about that flower, right? I could find out what type of flower it is. I could find out how long it's been since it was picked. I could find out which chemicals give it its colour. All those kinds of things. And yet, no matter how much I tested and researched, I would never be able to answer the question of how it got onto my doorstep. Perhaps it blew there in the wind, or someone dropped it accidentally. Or perhaps there's a bigger story here. In this case, someone trying to tell me something. Or try this as another example. Through science, I could learn almost anything about you. I could learn all kinds of facts and features and characteristics. And yet, even after all of that, I wouldn't even know your name. For that, I need a different approach. Now, that materialistic worldview, which many have adopted, offers us its own story to explain who we are. And in all honesty, it's stunningly grand, isn't it? It's a story of stardust and supernovas, a story of chance chemical reactions, of survival and fighting. The odds of you sitting here today are absolutely tiny. And yet here you are, a complex and independent creature beyond anything we can make from scratch in a lab, even now. It's incredible. What a story. You are unlikely. You're a triumph of nature. You are special and unique. And yet, whilst it does label us as special and unique, this materialist story also informs us that we are nothing more than matter and energy. I guess the flip side of the story is that we are people who will die on a planet that will die in a universe that will die. There is no master storyteller with a plan. There is no ultimate meaning for humanity. So instead, we are the storytellers. We must tell the stories which create meaning and purpose and value for ourselves. And it's perfectly possible to do that. In fact, we quite like getting to decide for ourselves. But it also means that that meaning is little more than an illusion, right? You're just telling yourself a story in order to satisfy your own desire to mean something. Ultimately, we know that it's just arbitrary. Maybe you're okay with that, but for me, it just doesn't sit right. We can use science to test and observe so much about ourselves and our world, but when it comes to understanding what we are and who we are and why we are, I think we need a different method. I think we need a story that makes more sense of the things we see and the things we feel. Because I do feel like meaning and value and purpose are real things that I have, that they are not mere illusions. And I wonder if, in honesty, that's a position that many of us can relate to. And this is why I want to tell you a different story. The story that faith offers us. And in doing so, I'm not trying to prove to you that God exists, but let me tell you a bit of that story, because I think it gives us an alternative that makes more sense of us, it makes more sense of our world, and even more sense of science, in a way which means I don't have to live an illusion. The story goes like this. We were made. We were made with intention and with purpose. We were made valuable because our Creator valued us, just like the way that the things you create have value to you. And our world too. Our world was made carefully and in an ordered way. It was not an accident, but a carefully developed plan. And life is not chance, but it was made and it is precious and it should be esteemed and preserved. The story explains that this world is loaded with meaning which stems from all of this. It means something because there is a mind behind it. There is a creator behind it. We mean something because someone made us. You mean something because you're not just a bunch of mostly carbon atoms. You're a being with inherent dignity and worth. The story tells us that this world is broken and that even though it's brilliant, it's somehow supposed to be even more. And humanity too. That we've rejected our Creator and His purposes and we are less than we were made to be. And we were supposed to be more. But even so, even for now, the purpose and the meaning and the value are all still there. This story tells us that the Creator Himself dignified this brilliant natural world by becoming a part of it, by becoming a man called Jesus. And that He walked and talked and told the truth, revealing to us the truth about this world. And the story says that we were made with intelligent brains in part so that we too can understand this world and to develop it and to cultivate it and to create within it and do incredible things with it. In this story, even our science has a purpose because it is part of what we were made for. So that's the thing, isn't it? 20th century author C.S. Lewis put it poetically when he said, if our minds are dependent on brains, and brains on biochemistry, and biochemistry, in the long run, on the meaningless flux of the atoms, I cannot understand how the thoughts of those minds should have any more significance than the sound of the wind in the trees. Why should I trust my brain? Why should I trust that my reason is sound or that I'm observing accurately? Many of the philosophers recognized this, and it drove them mad. Loads of the artists too followed them. But on the other hand, if I'm in a world with order and pattern that can be understood, and a brain that was designed to properly evaluate and understand, then suddenly science makes sense. It becomes purposeful and important. When I look at myself, and I look at the people around me, and I observe the patterns of our lives, I see that we live as if there really is far more to this world than the physical. And reason leads me to conclude that perhaps we are just more than physical creatures. That we are more than just coincidental bundles of matter. I don't think that's an irrational leap in the dark. Science gives me all the tools I need to explain the natural world, but it does not give me what I need to understand everything about the world or about myself. But by contrast, here is a story in which not only science makes perfect sense, but also one in which the whole world makes sense, and in which I make sense with all of my thoughts and my feelings and my secret desires and instincts. In the materialistic story, meaning and purpose and value are illusions, but in this story, they're real. Imagine if that dream world was all that I knew. It wouldn't really make sense, would it? Because in my dream world, I constantly find information and input that doesn't originate there. Things from the real world. In this way, the dream world just constantly hints at the real world. But on the other hand, when I'm awake, I have no trouble explaining the idea of dreaming. It makes perfect sense. It's smaller and it fits inside my explanation and understanding of the world. In a similar way, it seems like if we are just matter and energy, we can barely fit in and rationalize science, let alone everything else. Why should I trust my cognitive capacity? The story faith gives not only creates the possibility of real meaning and value, but also of real knowing and understanding, and of doing science with greater conviction that it matters. In this way, Christianity doesn't just make sense of itself, it makes sense of every detail of life in our world, science very much included. As we turned our backs on the religious superstitions of our ancestors, we imagined that we were waking up to a better reality, out of the world of fantasy and into the world of reality. But actually, it seems to me that we find ourselves now very similar to the dreamers, because the world in which we find ourselves can't explain or fit in the way in which we live. It feels real, but there's information there that doesn't belong. It doesn't originate there. It doesn't make sense. What if that drive for meaning, that conviction of value, that sense of something more that you feel is not just some messy loose end or coincidence of the evolutionary chain, but rather the ringing of an alarm clock, beeping and stirring you to wake up and acknowledge that there is more to this world than the story that you are telling. Before I finish, let me leave you with an invitation. Valuing science doesn't have to mean forgetting faith, and adopting faith doesn't mean you have to disregard science. On the contrary, I think we have to hold both and treasure both, because both only make sense when we see the bigger story, when we hold them together in their proper places. In Jesus, we can know more than science could ever tell us, more about this world, more about the God who is above this world and beyond it. Life by only science will give you only part of the story, but there is so much more to be told. I'm going to stop there. We're going to take a pause. You can send in your questions. You can talk to the people on your table, tell them what you thought of what I've just said. I'll come back with a couple of friends in a few minutes' time, and we'll do our best to answer some of them, either from the floor or from the screen. Thanks for listening.